A new level of ambition and excellence thrives at the Texas Tech System. A $2 billion higher education enterprise with 4 diverse and distinguished universities. Because from here, it's possible.
Lobby Days, the first and only platform that automates the setup and administration of your lobby day at the Capitol, so you can focus on what matters during session. Learn more at lobbydaysmedia.com or stop by our booth at TribFest.
Okay. All right, can y'all hear me? Okay, so I am Abby Livingston. I'm the Washington Bureau Chief of the Texas Tribune. And when Evan came to me early on about TribFest this year, he sort of said, "What's your dream panel?" And previous to my time at the Tribune, I was a House campaigns reporter at Roll Call, which is the newspaper of Capitol Hill. And I said, I want to bring my friends from Washington and talk about House races on a really inside way. And the thing I want to emphasize, 2 points on this panel. One, there are a lot of people you see on television, on cable news, talking about House races, and I don't think they've ever worked on a House campaign. The 4 people up here are either insiders to campaigns or expert observers. And the other thing is, especially in Texas, I think it's sometimes hard to know that what's happening right in front of you is a singular House race, but what is happening elsewhere around the country could affect that race. So if an incumbent's doing really well in Texas, it could affect another incumbent in Tucson. And so that is why I love House races. It's my favorite part of politics. And these people have spent years learning and being active in them. And so I am just so excited all 4 of these people made it to Austin. And so now I will introduce them. And so on my right is Dave Weigel. He is a political reporter from the Washington Post and a graduate of Northwestern University. One of the reasons he's on this panel is because he's possibly the most traveled reporter this cycle in different House districts across the country. He has been to Texas possibly more times than I have to cover some races. I also am I think Dave is one of the best writers of my generation, and I think he is by far the most clever tweeter. Is that the right word?
Definitely the second part, yeah.
And to his right is Allie Lapp. And Allie is a graduate of the University of Puget Sound, and she is a native sort of Washington State, and she came up through the ranks in House Democratic politics. She was part of Rahm Emanuel's sort of 2006 dream team that took over the House. And there's actually a book about it called The Thumpin', and y'all should read it. And she is the president of House Majority PAC, which is the go-to Democratic super PAC in House politics. And so basically, in 2010, when the Democrats got shellacked, they chose Allie to sort of figure out this new frontier of super PACs in the House world. And she's also involved in Democratic redistricting efforts going into the next decade. And then there's Dave Wasserman, who is a graduate of the University of Virginia, and he is one of the foremost experts on House races. There are very few people in this world who know more about congressional districts and demographics, and if you came up to him and said what town you're in, he can probably guess who your member of Congress is. And additionally, so in the Washington sphere, people pay David at Cook Political Report, where he works, they pay massive amounts of subscription fees to know what David knows. And so I would characterize him as sort of the Moody's of Washington. When he decides a race is toss-up, that's an earthquake. And on the far end is Chris Perkins. He actually lives here in Austin. He actually, on the last minute, joined this panel. We had another operative named Liesl Hickey, and she had to cancel at the last minute, and she is friends with Allie, and she blamed Allie for her presence not being here because the Democrats are doing so well. Liesl has to go work on a campaign. So Chris graciously stepped in. He is one of the premier pollsters in the country, but he lives here in Austin. He was part of Ted Cruz's 2012 Senate race, one of the biggest upsets in politics, and a staffer, and was behind the 2003 redistricting maps. And so this is the panel. And
no applause for that.
Yeah.
We're
in Austin, so anyway, so I don't want to litigate what happened yesterday on this panel. I want to ask you from a more objective, if I called you and said, what does this mean? And I'll start with Dave. How do you think this plays electorally over the next 5 to 6 weeks?
Well, all of my determinations are There are presidential elections. Lots of people vote in them. There are midterms. Fewer people vote in them. We've had a couple in a row where way fewer Democrats voted. And I look at many events as, will this make the Democrats who voted for Hillary but otherwise sleep on things, will this make them turn out? This one, I think, instinctively, based on data and all those reasons, yes, it will. The way this played out was almost perfectly calibrated to excite you if, maybe you're an Arizona woman, you're not super pumped to vote for Kirsten Sinema because you disagree with her on a few things. You look at, you're going to have, I think Elizabeth Warren has a phrase about being at Trump's inauguration, how it's tattooed to the inside of her eyeball. I think that for a lot of women who are inclined to vote Democratic, this is going to stick with them. I'm less convinced. There's some Republicans saying optimistically, there was a rallying cry against the left, the unfairness, the smears of the left. Sure, but conservative media has a daily churn of things that make you very angry. I'm not sure if this is going to play much bigger than Colin Kaepernick kneeling. I think for Democratic women, this is going to be more potent than anything I would have predicted a month ago.
Allie?
I agree with Dave. Look, Democrats couldn't have, dreamt up a better scenario to remind a lot of female voters what the stakes are in this election. And I think after Trump's election, you saw women around the country energized. You saw the rallies. You saw women, ready to resist and fight back. And if any of that energy had dissipated over the last, almost 2 years, I think what's happening right now with Kavanaugh is just stoking that up again. And I think, by and large, the way I describe how women feel about what's going on in the political environment in the Republican Party right now is that, Donald Trump said and told the American people, here's how I treat women. He was very clear about it and not very apologetic about it. And the country, basically, a majority of voters in the right states held their noses and voted for him anyway. And I think a lot of women said, that's how you feel about how we're treated, you're still going to vote for this guy. And then you see the Republican Party right now kind of railroading Kavanaugh through, despite these allegations, many of which seem quite credible. I think you're going to see a backlash. I think you're going to see energized female voters in 5.5 weeks from now on Election Day.
David?
Well, first of all, because we're in church, I have to confess I'm feeling a little worse for the wear this morning because we had to raise a glass last night to Abby's birthday. So happy birthday,
Abby.
The big 2-5. But in any case, look, I don't think Democratic women can get much more fired up than they are. We are likely to see 2018 become the first year in history when Americans elect more than 100 women to the U.S. House of Representatives, and that's as much a direct reaction to Trump. Before Kavanaugh was even nominated, most filing deadlines, virtually every filing deadline had passed in the country. As much as 1992, and that year of the woman was a reaction to Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. And keep in mind, we call 1992 the year of the woman. Well, there were 24 new women elected to the House that year. We're likely to see between 30 and 40 new women elected to the House this year, and it's going to be driven almost entirely by Democrats.
Chris?
Well, first of all, thank you, Abby, for having us. For those that aren't from Austin, I'm the one technically local. I'm not from here originally, grew up in D.C., but I really enjoy living here. So those that aren't from here, welcome, and thank you for having us. I think I speak for all of us to say thank you. As of yesterday, I think what it does is, I would say, yes, it's going to fire. This is a scenario where I think it fires up both bases. You have the right base, you have the left base that it fires up. But I would say, in general, what it does is, outside of each political base, it reminds people how much they hate Washington. You saw Justice Ginsburg come out and say this is theater. She's not exactly one who is even remotely right-leaning, and even when she suggests it's essentially political theater, I think the non-base of the right and the non-base of the left look at it from a perspective of, this is just politicians in Washington, again, bickering, et cetera, and then that comes down to who is in power. The Republicans are in power. They control the House, they control the Senate, they control the presidency. So does that backlash onto the Republicans because of the theater, or is it the Democratic piece of obstructionism that some of the Republicans are trying to play? I think that's essentially what we're going to find out.
So back to the point of this panel, I'm just going to pose the question. I'll start in the other direction with Chris. Are we in a wave, and what is a wave?
Yeah, a wave, the blue wave. You know, the map, congressional map, when you look at it nationally, to put it lightly, is challenging for Republicans this year. You've got a generic ballot that, I think I checked this morning, that is leaning toward, that's favoring the Democrats somewhere between 7 to 10 points nationally. The president's approval rating is upside down by somewhere between 10 and 13, depending on which poll you're looking at. So, I mean, I'll let you guys talk about the wave, but from a perspective of who is going to benefit from the House elections this year, I don't think there's any question that it's going to be the Democrats that are going to gain seats. It's just a matter of how many is it. I mean, I think a wave, I guess a wave would be a full sweep. I'm trying to remember the number. What is it,
23.
23. So if there's 23, if it's right at 23, is it a wave because the Democratic Party takes the majority in the House, or does it need to be 40? I don't know that I would describe, I don't know that I could put a number on a wave, but you can just see by the general environment and the map, it's going to be challenging for Republicans.
Wasserman?
Yeah, I remember in 2010 when a Democratic pollster basically said this thing is like 5 or 6 beer goggles ugly for us, and we're basically, telling our clients, you're pretty much politically dead at this point. How do you want to go out? Well, I'm looking at Republicans who were in our lean Republican column in April who are now trailing in independent polls. I'm looking at people who've been in toss-up all cycle who are now Republicans in the House who are now down double digits. Well, look, the difference between a wave and a tsunami is going to be the Senate. And fundamentally, we have the smallest overlap between the battlefield of competitive House and Senate races that we've ever had. Texas is one of the few states where we have a lot of competitive House races and a competitive Senate race, but it's more the exception than the rule. And that could lead to a very divergent outcome given our urban-rural divide in the country.
Allie?
Yes, I think Dave makes an excellent point about the difference between a wave and a tsunami is the Senate. But I don't think there's any doubt we're in a wave election. And there's a couple data points I would look at. One, since the summer, I went back and looked at a bunch of public polls, and there are 33 Republican incumbents or open seats held by a Republican now, where the Republican is already losing in the polls. I went back and looked at some data from 2014, which was a good year for Democrats. Only 2 Democrats were losing in polling in the summer and managed to right themselves and win in November. It's hard to do. If you're an incumbent who's losing in the summer, what's going to happen between now and November that makes that turn around for you? Not a lot. 33 in public polling, and 3 were straight up tied. That is a sign of a wave to me. The other thing I look at is sort of district by district. There are some Republicans who've represented Democratic districts for 10 years, 15 years, and they've really worked hard in their districts. They've cultivated a moderate image, and trust me, I've tried to take them out year after year. I never succeeded. They were just sort of dug into their districts, and this year we see a lot of those Republicans losing by 10 points in this early polling. I don't know how they survive. And these are largely suburban, higher income, higher educated districts around the country. And then the last thing I will say is that then you look at districts that Donald Trump carried by 10, 12 points, and a lot of Democrats were like, should we just stop competing in Iowa? Are we done in rural Iowa? Are we done in upstate, in Maine and Maine 2, or in some of these more conservative parts of Michigan? Maybe that's not our place anymore. We're tied or ahead in a bunch of those districts. So all of these factors coming together, I do believe that we're in a pretty big wave situation here.
Michael?
I think I agree with a lot of that, and this cycle reminds me a lot more of 2006 and 14 than it does of 10, because in those years, the economy was not incredible. It's better, objectively better now than it was in either of those years. When the economy is good enough for you to focus on our things, you do. And in 2014, there were issues that broke Republicans at the last minute, like Ebola, which we all obviously died from, condolences. A panic about something that Democrats will report that drove people away from it at the last minute, a panic over ISIS, a few external issues coupled with a sense of fatigue in the Obama agenda at that point in the right places, and Democrats not being excited. So you don't need everything to be falling apart for a party to lose ground. And I think this has also been more predictable of a year than people were willing to think. Trump's victory, I think, broke a lot of brains because it was so unlikely. It required so many tripwires breaking in the last couple weeks. But my North Star has always been, but for Comey, but for Anthony Weiner's laptop, everyone is right. Hillary Clinton becomes president. We're in a different situation. Trump won with 46% of the vote and behaved like he'd won with 60% of the vote. And doing that just put him in an unpopular position for the people who weren't going to support him in the first place. If you just say neutrally, well, the president's at 40%, what's going to happen? You would predict him lose the House. A lot of what's keeping the optimism afloat is, well, he's beat him before. And that's actually, I think, another problem for Republican enthusiasm. I was just before the Kavanaugh, this is Wednesday, I guess. I was at one of the confirmed Kavanaugh rallies and just asking Republican voters who'd come in from Virginia, North Carolina, if they thought it was possible for Democrats to win the House. And you can probably predict what they said, which was, well, the polls said Trump wouldn't win, he won. So that kind of hubris, I don't think, is very good for the side that has it. And it's also, I think maybe some of this is in the DNA. I find Democrats in the modern era panic a lot more, perhaps constantly, and Democrats have a lot more confidence. But sometimes that can bite you. I think, I'm not sure who the person who's going to stay home completely, but it does change it changes the amount of hours you're willing to work, it changes the money you're going to give, et cetera. It changes where you give the money, because I find a lot of Republican activists are kind of given to PACs and to the RNC that may not be the right places, and leaving Democrats, as Dave's been writing about too. And you see these candidates who, in another year, might have required a big bailout from a party committee, who are raising millions of dollars on their own. Just Democrats have been a lot more scared and strategic. I think Republicans have been a little bit too confident because they beat everybody's thinking in 2016. So why not? Why not every election will we defy the experts again?
First of all, Chris, I want to ask you, Will Hurd is one of your clients, right?
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to start with Wasserman on this question. Everyone who wants to jump in, feel free to. When I talk to sources, particularly on the Republican side, there is now a belief Will Hurd will survive nuclear winter. And for context here, for a decade, there has been one competitive congressional race in Texas, the Texas 23rd. It's in San Antonio and stretches for 8 hours to El Paso. It has been represented by Congressman Will Hurd, a Republican. He defied gravity last cycle, outperformed Donald Trump in the district, and he was the top target at the beginning of this year. At the same time, Democrats are now competing for Pete Sessions in Dallas and John Culberson in Houston. Why in this district that everyone thought was going to be the low-hanging fruit is there so much confidence in Hurd and that he will win, and that these other two guys are in deep trouble who've never had races before?
Well, now that we're on Texas, I think the irony here, and I say this as an outsider, is that I think Republican policies in Texas are largely contributing to the migration of the state to purple status. I mean, the legacy of Rick Perry's 14 years as governor was corporate relocations from all of these high-tax coastal states like California, Illinois, and New York, New Jersey, and millions of those professional workers moved to suburbs of Austin and Houston and Dallas and San Antonio and brought their values with them. And so I think that's really the reason why not only we're talking about a competitive Senate race, but also why the northern suburbs of Dallas are changing politically so rapidly. And I believe Pete Sessions is actually the most vulnerable Republican member in Texas in the House. And that's a district that voted by 16 points for Mitt Romney in 2012 and by 2 points for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Now, Will Hurd's...
And no opponent. No Democrat ran for that seat.
No Democrat ran, because no one thought that Hillary Clinton ever had a chance of winning that district. It was drawn to be a safe Republican district, but it's funny how gerrymanders can unravel over time. Likewise, John Culberson is also in a very white-collar, suburban, high-college district, and that's exactly the demographic that's on fire right now for the Republican Party. Too many fires to put out, really. And what's giving Beto so much momentum in those areas, but the missing puzzle piece really is Hispanics. And typically we see Hispanic turnout drop disproportionately in midterms relative to other groups. That's been true in Texas, it's been true in California. It's one of the reasons why this is an uneven wave. And we're seeing polling that suggests not only are Hispanics nowhere near as enthusiastic as suburban professionals about voting in the midterms, but that Will Hurd has gained traction by, on the one hand, getting a lot of money from the and working on relationships with the oil and gas industry and the ag industry, but also vocally opposing the wall. And I think that's won him credit with a lot of voters, Hispanic voters in his district.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Sure, I'll talk. I mean, I think, well, when we're looking at Texas, the Texas map in general, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. So for many years, Democrats in the state have been suggesting that Texas will turn, Texas will turn, Texas will turn, and they base that on the rapid growth of Hispanic minority percentage. Well, if you go back 10 years, the number of minorities and Hispanics has increased, so has the Republican number. Now, and so from my perspective, the Texas growth isn't racially based, it's based on regional. So when you look at Texas and you're looking at the growth in general, you're looking at the more suburban areas. I mean, that's the true engine of growth, is the suburban areas, Houston suburbs, Dallas suburbs, Austin, San Antonio suburbs. So that is essentially where the growth patterns are in Texas, is regionally and not ethnically. Now, this come to now. Trump changed the map. You saw him performing well under what any other Republican in the suburban areas, in the outer suburban areas of Dallas, of Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. Thus, therefore, like Dave said, he won with 46 and is acting like he won with 60. So now you have the members that have represented these districts for a while having to, maybe they haven't campaigned for a while, or maybe they have, but having to run real organizations now because they saw Trump's number come down in the more suburban districts. So that's kind of the big picture take on the Texas map, like specifically that, he changed the dynamic of the national map, and specifically when it comes to Texas, he changed the Texas map from a perspective of the rural voters in Texas have become substantially more Republican, but yet the suburban voters who were normally Republican in virtually every other race, weren't very pro-Trump at all. And now, what do the members of Congress and the Republican candidates do about that?
So I'm not a doctor, so if this is a wrong metaphor, someone can correct me out there. But it's my understanding, if there's a huge disaster and a lot of people are injured and go to the emergency room and it overwhelms the ER's facilities, the doctors have to make a decision when they look at all the wounded. And if some people are so wounded they can't be saved, the doctors let them die, and they go save the people who can be saved, and it's called triage. Allie, what is political triage?
Well, I think that is the right analogy. And, we're watching the political triage right now, and it's, the party under siege in this election, that's the Republican Party, is having to make some tough choices with their resources to say, which are the seats we want to fight for. And the party that's doing well this cycle, it's the Democrats, we're trying to figure out where should we go expand the map. And in 2010, which was really the first cycle, Republicans saw a massive amount of outside spending. There's no doubt in my mind they won an additional 5 to 10 seats to pad their emerging majority, because in the last 2 to 3 weeks, they had $500 to $1 million to go put in districts that no one was paying attention to. Jim Oberstar in Minnesota is my favorite one. They went in there, last 2 weeks, they got that district. So we're seeing that happen now, but I will say there's one caveat to the triage, which the largest spenders in these House races are the National Republican Campaign Committee, which is controlled by members of Congress. It's the insider establishment, and then there is my counterpart, a big super PAC called Congressional Leadership Fund. And there's some pressures on both of those organizations, as there are on our side of the aisle as well, in terms of how you do that triage. So, for example, if you are at the NRCC, if you have to triage, but there's some pressure about which members maybe are more worth saving than others. And it's not just based on poll numbers. It may be, we can't be seen as abandoning our few minority or female caucus members. And so they're still spending to help Barbara Comstock in Virginia even though she is down by 10 points in every single poll that comes out. They're putting $5 million into that race, much to the chagrin of lots of Republicans who wish they could have a piece of that money. And on the super PAC side, because super PACs can take unlimited money, there's a guy named Sheldon Adelson who has given that super PAC $30 million, 3-0. He's a Las Vegas casino magnate. So as I think about how they're going to do triage, I don't anticipate them pulling out of Las Vegas races anytime soon. I think they're going to be in there till the end. They've got Sheldon Adelson money. But you can already see some decisions being made. The Republicans have essentially given up on a Western Pennsylvania seat that is held by Connor Lamb, who won that special election. It looks like both sides are pulling out of that race. Both Democrats and Republicans are pulling out of an Iowa race because the Democrat is so far ahead. And now you see Republicans are spending $1.5 million in Wisconsin 1, Paul Ryan's seat. That shouldn't be really competitive. They're spending money in North Carolina 2, which is a Raleigh-based seat that Trump won. No one had that on their map this year. So you see some of those decisions being made, but there are some political considerations that go into those triage decisions.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have any other good triage stories or anything?
Well, it's already kind of happened in Senate races. I mean, there was the stat that Republicans loved, which is that there were 10 Democrats up in states that Trump won in 16. There still are this year. It's actually 11 now because there's a special election in Minnesota for Tina Smith. And in a number of those races, Republicans have quietly kind of backed out. There are commitments. I mean, the thing about donor-driven politics is sometimes, and the funniest example of this is still the 2012 campaign, where there were some super PACs that were literally a rich guy who just wanted to run ads against Obama, talking about how socialism was coming to America. They're not that bad this year, but there are some that are they're going to keep plugging in against Tammy Baldwin, Wisconsin, and against Sherrod Brown, Ohio, and the people who have to do the triage because they don't have infinite money, they backed out weeks ago, and they've already been kind of focusing on new races. So the Senate has been much realistic, and I think it's just a factor of in 14 and 16, win the Senate, hold the Senate, super PACs were the big priority. In this cycle, it's been the House PACs. They've had more money in the first place, but then these matter. I mean, if the fact that Tammy Baldwin's way up, the fact that Debbie Stabenow's way up in Michigan, the fact that there's no cavalry coming in and that the president's deeply unpopular there, all that matters. But it's been a bit clearer picture of where the country's been moving because of what happened in those Senate races. And that was in the summer. I mean, I think the big story most people wrote was the Koch donors have a summit, which is good. That's how democracy's supposed to work. Like everyone, all rich people get in one room and say, okay, check this, don't check that. And the list that came from that meeting's pretty much been stable. We abandoned a couple of these guys. We went all in on a couple of these guys.
Well, there's a question of how Republicans will triage these races, but keep in mind, Democrats have some spending decisions to make too.
Yeah.
And it turns out Donald Trump's been the best fundraiser that the Democratic Party's ever had, but you've had past cycles where parties have left a lot of races on the table because it turns out that there are a lot of elections that turn out to be 2 or 3 point races on election night that no one thought were close. And a lot of the races that attracted the highest spending in all of these tens of millions of dollars turn out to be blowouts. So, if I'm the party riding a wave, I think a solid investment would be to spend a couple $1 million polling a lot of long shots to see which races have potential. Because Democrats have to be concerned about potentially, not taking full advantage of this once-in-a-generation opportunity.
I remember in 2006, when I was at the DCCC, I was at the independent expenditure arm of the party. So the way campaign finance law works is the party committee says, hey, independent expenditure staffers, here's $60 million, go win races. But you can't talk to the campaigns about it. You have to do it all independently. So we had a budget, and actually this story has a Texas connection because
I was hoping you'd tell this
we had locked in $2 million in our budget to defend Chet Edwards, if you all remember Chet Edwards. And it was like in the last 2 weeks, and we were going to go all in and make sure he was okay. And we did invest in that polling, and like Chet Edwards was doing fine. He was doing great, and he continued to be up. And so there was this one happy day when we got to sit down and say, we're going to cancel our Chet Edwards time. Who gets $2 million? And we looked around the country and found all these long shot races Kirsten Gillibrand, I mean, she really should thank Chet Edwards for her career, because had we not had that $2 million freed up by Chet Edwards doing his job and locking down that district, we wouldn't have been able, and we just went and spent an extra, $500,000 in Kirsten Gillibrand. She was not in our budget. We went, we spent there, put some ads, helped her get over the top there, and there were a handful of other Democrats that we helped win with that Chet Edwards money.
On that front, I've sort of posed the inverse theory, and I'm curious if y'all weigh in if you agree or disagree. So there's a very interesting House race shaping up near here, Texas 31st, John Carter. This is a safe Republican district. But this supernova candidate named MJ Hager has burst onto the scene. And she raised $1 million on a viral video over the summer. And she is now using that money to be on television. And as of a few days ago, she was the only advertising in this race. There were no outside groups, and Carter had not gone on the air, the incumbent. I have posed the theory, Hager could win, I don't know, but it may, in the grand scheme, she could win by losing, meaning she could lose that race, but drag Republican money that could be spent elsewhere into the Austin media market to save John Carter, and that could be money pulled from some other incumbent. I'm curious if any of y'all agree or disagree with that theory.
Yeah, the resources are finite, and so to the degree that Republicans have to go and defend some of these incumbents that maybe Democrats go and push on, and that opens up some space for others, yes. I do tend to think that, if Sheldon Adelson gave $30 million, what's another 5 or 10 at the end of the day? My guess is he'll do that, and they'll have the resources they need to be everywhere. Chris?
Yeah, first of all, as Dave said, invest in polling. I strongly support that. Big supporter of investing in polling. I'm all about that. So kind of on that note, as you were talking about the Northern Austin seats, one of the things that, got to give credit to the Democrats, to Allie's side, about just national recruitment. I mean, one of the things that we've seen this year from the Democrat side is they've done a really good job recruiting congressional candidates. Regardless of whether they were going to get funded or not, they still got quality men and women, mostly women, as you guys were talking about earlier, into each one of the individual races, whether that was organic or recruitment. I'll go ahead and give you kudos for recruitment.
It's so organic. I mean, these candidates just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, and as you were talking about this candidate in North Austin, you've got a scenario where now whether or not they were recruited or organic, now the atmosphere is they are doing really well raising money. You need money to compete, you need money for messaging. So now you see the Democratic candidates doing very well raising the money, which gets back to what we were talking about earlier from a perspective of where do you utilize resources on the Republican side and the Democratic side. And that is, the problem for us when on the Republican side, when we're looking at a challenging map, when we're looking at a challenging environment. But I think the big piece is, remember, it is incredibly hard, even in a red wave, blue wave, whatever year it is, for an incumbent to lose. I mean, the majority of incumbents, Republican or Democratic, are going to win. Where the advantage lies with the party that's going to gain typically is in the open seats. So, and there's quite a few of them this year, mostly on our side of the aisle. So that becomes the decision of, when a seat that no one was expected is put into play, which has an incumbent in it, do you go to help the Republican incumbent, or should that Republican incumbent be able to stand on their own? Should they have done the work or have had the background and or fortitude to get everything ready for the rainy day, and the resources are dedicated to holding open seats? Because it's really difficult for candidates of either party to raise money in an open seat scenario versus when you're in an incumbent scenario, you should be able to raise money. So therefore, it's the means of, is a race like what you were describing, Texas 31, going to take resources and force our side to spend there when it could be spent better in open seats? Because open seats is really where the gains are going to be made by the ultimate winner.
I'd add just one thing to that, which is I do think Republicans, not all Republicans, some strategists were kind of wish casting, which is when you say very confident sounding things and you convince yourself they're going to happen. One was Democrats have gone around, they've gone crazy, they're all Antifa, they're all kneeling for the national anthem. They're going to nominate wild candidates who can't win, and they didn't. In almost every case, they did not. They nominated maybe they're more liberal than they would have been 10 years ago, but they're not running on impeachment. They're not running on putting Sean Hannity in a gulag or something. They're running pretty standard health care, jobs, et cetera, issues. The other thing was, well, they had a good quarter because people are angry and excited, but that's going to taper off. And it didn't. I mean, they've been continued to outraise, if not outraise Republican incumbents, raise enough to be competitive in places where those guys were not competitive. I don't think anyone necessarily, well, a couple people did go to sleep on that. Dave Bratton, Virginia, is one that Republicans love to talk about. It's just we warned him this is a different kind of year, and he's somebody who had faced off against protesters, assumed the crazy left was gonna blow it. That race is especially interesting to me because Democrats nominated a moderate CIA operative, former CIA operative, who's not for single-payer health care. We can debate how popular that should be, but she's not running on it. She's running on stuff that's 70% issues. So they've just pretended that she is running on single-payer health care incorrectly because they've realized, oh, Democrats did what they said they were going to do, and we were thinking, we being the party that nominated Donald Trump, we were thinking they were going to do something like that, and they really didn't, which has put a lot of stuff in play.
So, Abby, can I say one more? I'm sorry, Dale. I was going to say one more thing about the upside of having like an MJ Hager, even if she doesn't win that race. Someone like MJ or Joseph Kopser in these districts that are tough for Democrats. I mean, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton got 42% in these kinds of districts. And that's replicated all over the country. We see really good candidates running in some tough districts, most of whom are not going to win. Let's just be honest about it. But the good news is, if you're a Democrat, and let's say you live in MJ Hager's district, and there hasn't been a Democrat challenging your incumbent Congressman Carter forever, potentially, right? And so if you're a Democrat there and people say, well, what is a Democrat? Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And there's a lot of people out there that say, well, I'm not really that. I don't really, I don't identify with those people. It's amazing for the Democratic Party to have people like MJ Hager out there, and they're like, oh, that's a Democrat? And there's people excited about her, and I see her signs. I mean, you're seeing this with Beto, right? Yeah. Like, I'm seeing her signs everywhere, and okay, I'm a Democrat too. I can come out. I can announce to the world I am a Democrat. And it is, I think, really important for the overall brand and image of the Democratic Party to have these kinds of candidates in districts that have not been challenged before.
5 years ago, I used to say that for Democrats to win back control of the House under these gerrymandered lines, they would need one of two things to happen. Either a resettlement program of their own voters to move them out of urban and coastal districts into competitive seats, or an unpopular Republican president in a midterm year. And, well, we've got that unpopular Republican president, but we're also seeing Democrats move out of Austin and into Williamson County. Yeah. And the 31st district is changing, and Round Rock's politics are becoming more competitive. The problem for Hager might be Bell County, but just looking at this race, we moved it from likely R to lean Republican this week, and a big theme this year is generational change. John Carter is 76 years old, and MJ Hager, I think, is taking advantage of that change dynamic in more ways than one. So look, I do think it's a competitive race, and we're seeing a lot of Republicans who haven't had races in a long time are now the ones who are in the most challenging situations. And he did lose 35% of the Republican primary vote in March to other Republicans. Mm-hmm.
So because I'm mean, I had my fellows, a couple of fellows in the Tribune newsroom. We ran some numbers from the July fundraising, which is the most fundraising recent figures we have, of individual candidates, nominees, and incumbents in of the 36 House races. And in 2016, I believe aggregate, all of the Republican members of the delegation and challengers raised about $30 million. And on the Dem side, it was like 10. And then this year, Republicans went up a little bit, maybe like 32, and Dems aggregate raised 20 million. So they doubled their fundraising. A lot of this is districts like Brian Babin's, which is very hard to see that district flip, but the candidate has raised 500 grand, which is a huge amount for a no-name member. I mean, she's got name ID locally, but who is not endorsed by the DCCC. Are we seeing organic party building in the state where it's just decrepit and there's organic activity going on, or is this wasted money in areas that don't matter? And how does this affect the Senate race? Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah. Oh. I was looking at the guy actually from Texas. Sorry.
I know.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I wouldn't say it's wasted money, but you know, I think it is a scenario, kind of what we were just talking about. Of you're seeing quality candidates. The Democrats have quality candidates, and therefore their fundraising has been a lot stronger than it has been in the past. I don't know that. I don't think it's wasted. I don't, because you know it might divert resources, and that's okay. Even in seats that the Democratic candidate probably can't win, the fact that there is their ability to raise money, that goes a long way to saying how I would say inspired some of the donor community on the Democratic side is. And then I guess we'll see what it does with the vote share. But I wouldn't say it was wasted. I think that's a great strategy, and it's paying off.
The only election we've seen kind of a lot of people in the ballot recently was the Virginia state elections in 2017. What you saw there was some of that party building, state rep candidates who, if you asked everyone the Monday before the election, they had no shot. They outperformed by 10, 12 points. They took this state legislature from, I think, a 30-seat Republican majority to one vote. And what I also find going from district to district is people are Democrats are really aware of who their state senator and their state rep is, or who their congressman is, even if they don't think they can beat him. They all of a sudden know who the guy is, and they're organizing parties every weekend. They're doing door knocks for Democrats running against people who they literally didn't know the name of 2 years ago, which I think matters. Do you beat them all? No, but there's people who are state senators who've been there 30 years who wake up surprised. That's already happened a ton of primaries this year. People who just never lose because, well, they have their turnout number and they know what they need to win, and then here come 10,000 extra voters who voted for the challenger. And I don't know why that wouldn't repeat in November, because, again, it comes down to the community building part of this. People actually getting the difference between, being kind of interested in politics and voting, and then voting in every election is one thing. The difference between not knowing who anyone is and then being able to, identify voters in your district from walking precincts every weekend, that is enormous.
Yeah, and look, there have been a bunch of congressional special elections that have happened between Trump's inauguration and today. Democrats have outperformed their historic performance in all of those districts by an average of 17 points. So, I mean, if that holds for November, I mean, it's a tsunami. Even if that's cut in half, there are going to be a lot of Republicans who lose that no one thought could lose.
What do we think of how this Senate race could affect down ballot, particularly the congressional? Does anyone want to weigh in?
I'm seeing polling in some of these metro suburban districts that is just kind of off the charts bad for Republicans, and some surprising enthusiasm for Beto. We see these Dallas and Houston districts that voted for Romney pretty strongly. Beto's now up in the high single digits in those districts. The flip side is I don't really know. I haven't seen evidence that rural Texas has moved at all. And look, the perfect storm for Beto would be, enormous conversion of former Republicans in the metros, low Republican enthusiasm and turnout in rural Texas. But I think you also do need robust non-white, particularly Hispanic participation in the Valley and South Texas and in the urban cores. And that, I think, is the last missing puzzle piece. That won't affect Democrats down ballot because those are, for the most part, safe Democratic districts in Texas. But absolutely, it's affecting these congressional races in the major metros.
The Daves, what have y'all learned from watching Democratic primaries this year? And how do you think, is the House caucus moving left, or, is it going to be governable, manageable, whomever is the leader, and if they take the majority? What do y'all see on the ground, and how do you think the implications will affect?
Oh, I was starting to talk about that before, and how Republicans assumed everyone was going to go nuts and run far to the left. And what you saw was there were a few issues where people are going to run way to the left they were 10 years ago. The public option on healthcare, i.e., creating basically a Medicare a national health thing that you can buy into, not socialized medicine, not a takeover, but expanding Medicare is now the moderate position, and it was not before. That was the one that was too radical for the Senate Democrats. It's not radical anymore. Healthcare is a right as a name. Universal. I mean, actually, one dog that didn't hunt this year was a year ago. Nancy Pelosi was getting asked a lot if they would support pro-life Democrats, and she said, well, if they run, if they're nominees, sure. That hasn't happened at all because all this competition's happening in very pro-choice suburbs, if not really, really pro-choice, places where if the question is, should we cut off all funding for Planned Parenthood or not, the don't cut off Planned Parenthood funding is a big advantage. So they moved left on social issues, on healthcare itself, not in big ways. I mean, the whole Bernie Sanders agenda, I don't think got adopted in these races, and there are candidates who are underperforming because they've adopted those whole things. But generally, I'd say it's kind of in a sweet spot between where Bernie and Hillary were in 2016 across these. And the way it happened were a lot of local groups were organizing candidate forums and doing Q&As that the Tea Party did 8 years earlier. They got vetted. Democrats would be kind of honest, and when asked about single payer, say well, maybe not that, but lots and lots more money by taxing the rich for health care. That's where they ended up. It definitely moved left. It did not move left, I think, to the degree things moved right in 2010. You didn't see you saw two incumbent Democrats in the House lose primaries, which got coverage, probably too much coverage, because one was an extremely low turnout case where they both agreed on abolishing ICE, universal health care. One was a higher turnout race in Massachusetts, where they also both were very progressive candidates who didn't disagree on much. It was a generational, as you were saying before, it was a generational change. It was, we have old white guys. Why do we still have these old white guys? Why would we not have these women in their 30s or 20s and 30s who were exciting? No other Democrats were really in danger, even if they used to vote conservatively, if they voted against the Affordable Care Act when it was up, which was not what you saw in 2010 for Republicans. You saw the Bob Inslees hopeless or forced into retirement, the Joe Schwartz, and remember Joe Schwartz? The guys like that who were moderate at all got wiped out. The thing you've seen in places more this year in Texas, you've seen in Kansas before, where things are going to get more competitive because the moderate Republicans got wiped out. The moderate Democrats are mostly still there.
Wasserman, I'm going to cut you off. Can we go to audience Q&A? So if y'all have any questions, we'll put a mic up. And so, anyone? Okay, here we go.
No one wants to be first.
You can say, I got more. Yes, ma'am.
I've been intrigued. Can you hear me? Is this good?
Yes.
Listening to you talk, and so much of it sounds like it's a real chess game. Where do we move the money and the pieces go? And I don't know anything about that. And so one of the things that is interesting to me, though, is the way Beto is running his campaign without taking that money. And what is does that help him, or does that hurt him ultimately?
Well, I mean, look, he's raising a ton of money. It's just all coming organically from low donors. And I think, I think most folks would love to have the kind of national fundraising base that Beto does with, people sending him $100 every other week, right? It's really hard for candidates to, if they're not running for president, I think to generate that kind of base. And I think Beto has done it because he's so unique, and he's this compelling person, and he's running against Ted Cruz, who's a national name, right? So I think, no question, I think every Democratic, I can't speak for the Republicans, but every Democratic candidate in America would say, would you rather raise PAC money in a traditional way and sort of do things the way they've always done, or would you rather have a Beto model? They'd all choose the Beto model. It's just so challenging for some random House member, running in Colorado to do something like Beto's been able to do.
That promise, though, the I don't take corporate PAC money promise has really caught on. It's something that brought up on the left, and then there's been more established DC organizations like the Citizens United PAC that are, kind of political consultants who used to work with PACs just fine, and have told people to take this pledge because it polls really well.
It polls well,
and there's ways around it. You can still take money from people tied to the industry. There can be third-party PACs that come in for you, but you saying I'm going to forswear that might mean literally you gave up $50,000 in exchange for $500,000 of small donors.
That's right. If you're a Democratic challenger, you're not getting any corporate PAC money anyway. Corporate PACs really only give to incumbents. Now, the challenge will be if they win election, and now they're incumbent congressmen, they're going to say, no, I'm not going to take $5,000 from, you know, the Boeing PAC or the general election PAC, and they better hope that that small donor individual base keeps giving to them even though they're an incumbent now. That I think will be what'll be interesting.
Yes, sir?
So this is for all of you. What do you think the most important indicator will be maybe 2 weeks out for those toss-up races where it's unclear who's winning because there's not been a lot of polling, there's a lot of money for both sides? Like, what are you all looking at to say, okay, I think Jeff Denham in CA10, you know, he's going to hang on even though the indicators and the fundamentals show that he should lose?
Fundamentally, if a Republican incumbent is tied in the mid to high 40s, I would bet on the Democrat in that situation because the Republican's likely to have a name ID advantage. How many of you are following what the New York Times is doing? They're doing a series of live polls across a variety of congressional districts, and it's really interesting to see what's happening in real time there. There's a bit of a hangover in the pundit world right now because, you know, everyone's saying, well, in 2016 we underestimated Republicans, so we're going to do it again. Fundamentally, I think the flaw in 2016 was the media's failure to understand the nature of undecided voters, and that they tend, from what we know from history, they tend to break against the party in power. And in 2016, that was Democrats. In 2018, it's Republicans. And so I do think undecideds are likelier to break for change.
Yep. And a real simple way to answer your question from our perspective. When you're looking at an indicator, you know, remember all congressional districts have individual issues that are going to drive. But if you look at it from kind of a 10,000-foot view, the indicators I look at is presidential approval and generic ballot. And what is the trend about 2 to 3 weeks out? Doesn't have to be a number, but you want to see a trend. Is it going this way or that way? I mean, the idea is catch a trend, and then that's essentially the general indicator.
You've already answered this a little bit, but I'm curious if do these vows against corporate PACs or any PAC money, could that potentially change the Democratic Party going forward, or is this just a one-off thing for this election cycle? Is it sustainable to swear off the PAC money?
Well, I think for 2020, it's going to change how Democrats run for president. I think the upside, it will be very difficult for somebody who wants to excite the base to say, and I've also created a new PAC, the Americans Who Love Kirsten Gillibrand, LLC. I don't think it's tenable to do that because that attitude has changed so much. I actually, as you were saying, I think it's going to be tougher for a lot of people who get elected, almost some of them unexpectedly this year, to start turning down all the business interests in their district. For the National Democratic Party, I think that attitude is probably bent for a long time. I mean, this church we're in right now, Tom Perez was here before, and you're struck listening to kind of rank and file Democrats of how much they're still focused on that issue, even before they ask if they have the chance of winning, how much they blame corporate power about politics. I think another reason they'll be potent is that a lot of people, I'd still love to see a great poll on how many people think Trump funded his entire campaign himself. I think there was a point when he was, then by the end he wasn't. He's now an incumbent president going to wherever there's a Trump hotel, having a $100,000 a table fundraiser. Democrats will not be able to raise that money, so it makes sense for them to say we are the party that doesn't rely on these interests who are going to buy us and tell us what to do. It's something you can do if you don't have the presidency. If all you have is the House, you can say they've got the corporate interests and we don't. So I think it'll be very potent for them, at least for the next 4 years.
Hi, Leonard.
Happy birthday, Addie. My name's Leonard Chan. My question is, how do you anticipate the leadership teams of both Republicans and Democrats changing following the election?
Oh, I love this question.
Yeah.
So,
then you can take it.
Well,
GOP leader Louis Gohmert,
and this goes back
Democrat
to
leader Alexander Ocasio-Cortez. There we go.
Right. This goes back to your question about primaries, because I've seen 3 themes in Democratic primaries this year. Women, who are making up 50% of all non-incumbent candidates for House, which is unprecedented. Military veterans, a lot of whom are women. And then a third category, which is what I would call out-of-work Obama people who are treating 2018 as a massive job fair. But what we don't have a lot of this year are sitting state legislators or mayors or people who have been climbing the political ladder for a long time. These are people who don't have allegiance to hierarchy. By and large, they haven't needed to depend on Nancy Pelosi to come in and raise a lot of money for them. And so this is, I think, a class that's going to be unpredictable after the leadership, after the election, if Democrats do take control of the House, which I think there's about a 75% chance of happening. And look, Tom Perez was here. With all apologies to him, Democrats do not have a leader right now of the party. But you know what else? That's the best thing going for them in 2018. Because when you don't have a leader, then Trump doesn't have a foil. But it also means that the face of your party is whoever's running in each state and congressional district who fits that district best. And we have everyone from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Queens to someone like Richard Ojeda in southern West Virginia, who is a Democrat who voted for Trump and is within the margin of error in a district that voted for Trump by 50 points. But the most important number in that district is 36. That's the number of tattoos he has.
Yes, sir.
It seems to me that polling failed substantially in 2016. Has there been any effort to improve it, to change your algorithms, to conscientiously figure out a way to see what went wrong and what could be righted?
I'm going to talk over the pollster and the experts just for a second, because one of the stories I wrote right after the election was I talked to the state pollsters.
Could you talk a little more slowly?
Oh, sure. I wrote right after the election, I talked to all the state pollsters who blew it, and the main the lesson I learned was we got out of the field a week before the election and didn't see the late-breaking movement to Trump, and we won't do that again. So the state polls were the ones who got it wrong. The other people will probably make the point. The national polls actually correctly estimated Hillary Clinton would narrowly win the popular vote. Right. It was the state polls that got it wrong. The pollsters got it less wrong than people think, which again I think has been hurting Republicans all year, because in their collective imagination, personally, the media, like the media and the elite and George Soros and whoever else, Dracula, they all lied and said Trump would lose, and they didn't. No, pollsters were actually fairly right, except in states, and part of this is, frankly, they kind of don't have a ton of money, so they said, we got one big poll, we're going to come out, it says Hillary's up 3 in Michigan, we're done. She's up 3 in Michigan. She probably was at that moment, and they should have come in later and didn't.
I would also say that my organization, we do a ton of House race polling. We were really pretty spot on in 2016. Ironically, should have talked to Chris, because the one district that I think it's the hardest district in the country to poll is Texas 23. It's consistently a little bit off. It's always the one that surprises me, either happily or sadly. It's a really challenging district to poll. But our polling was really quite accurate. Even with that said, though, going back to what Dave Wasserman said a few minutes ago about the need to be polling everywhere as much as possible, we do a lot of live voice polls. We do what's called IVRs, where people just push a button on their phone. Those are actually remarkably reliable measures of where the race stands right now. It's not going to tell you what to do strategically, but it is a good measure of where it is. And we do online pollings. We did a bunch of polling in the California primaries, where, as you may know, the top 2 advance on, and there was a real risk of Democrats getting locked out of some of those, because you had 3 Republicans running and 10 Democrats, and do the math, you can see how 2 Republicans would get more vote, would advance. And our polling, we did polling combined with online polling, where we showed everyone the ballot, spot on. So I feel really confident in polling generally. Yeah,
and on the Republican side too, internally in the aftermath, there wasn't any problems. There wasn't at all. A couple of things on that. First of all, the good polls don't make it on the air. The ones that are good, I'm not giving letting Fox News take my polling. That's for internal value. There's no way I would let my polling get on the air. The ones that are on the air are the ones that aren't done as well, from my opinion, and those polls are meant to drive a story, not to provide internal value for an individual campaign effort. Having said all that, as Dave just pointed out, if you look at the very last polling that was done, I don't know who it was, LA Times and CNN, maybe I can't remember, that had something along the lines of Hillary plus 4. Well, a margin of error of 3.5 Hillary wins by 2. That's what happened. I think the polling was bad stories that were out there had less to do with polling, and it had to do with prognosticators, not you, Dave, like Nate Silver, who were, oh, the Democrats are going to win. Well, okay, Trump's coming back.
Said.
Yeah, right, I get it. But it was more of the prognosticator types that were essentially suggesting, not looking at polling, but saying, okay, oh yeah, Hillary's going to win. I don't know that I'd blame polling directly on that.
From here in my green room, I bet that voters in rural Ohio are really excited about this or that.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
that was what got it wrong.
Right.
And I'm sorry, we have 45 seconds left, so I'm going to have to cut it off. What I will say with that one moment, the one thing that makes Wasserman different from Nate Silver, I mean, many things, but you guys run analytics, and I didn't do well in math, but he interviews candidates. And I think sometimes when we start crunching numbers and looking at RCP and all of this stuff, we forget these are real human beings with flaws and strengths and things. And so, Weigel too, he gets on the ground, he sees these candidates. I mean, so I think it's also important, even in waves, candidates still sometimes matter. So, and that is the end of this panel, and I just want to say thanks to the panel, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Happy birthday again.
Thank you.
Thank you.